Welcome to Season 2 of ADAC Answers, an education podcast for all. Produced by the Podcast Business News Network, hosted by Jill Nicolini. ADAC's mission is to empower K-12 school leaders and teachers to meet the individual learning needs of all students through customized, professional development and coaching services. Led and staffed by passionate, committed professionals, ADAC prides itself on delivering precise solutions to its clients' unique education challenges. ADAC stands for Attain, Differentiate, Advance, and Collaborate. 4 words we believe epitomize our work. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Hey there, everyone, and welcome back. We got the members of ADAC here today, and we got a few different people here. My name's Phil Tillett. You guys, would you like to introduce yourselves to our audience?
Sure. So, Phil, my name is Ariella Hellman, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Advocacy and Public Policy at ADAC.
All right, excellent.
And I'm Nancy Kriegel. I am one of the board members of the ADAC Advocacy organization.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Danny Aqua. I'm Director of Special Projects for Teach Coalition. We have more than 200 Jewish day schools that are members of our organization across the country, and we've partnered the last couple of years with ADAC on behalf of our students.
All right, glad to hear it. So today we're talking about the ADAC advocacy as well as IDEA. So Ariella, would you like to get us started here? Can you remind the audience what IDEA is and how it applies to people in private schools?
Sure. So IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is a federal special education law that basically guarantees a right to a free and appropriate public to all students across the nation who are enrolled in public schools. Now, the catch is that students enrolled in private schools by their parents don't necessarily have a right to receive FAPE, this free and appropriate public education. However, they do still have a right to be included within IDEA. And IDEA provides very specifically for certain equitable services requirements, including the right to share equitably in the grant that comes from the federal government to the states and then distributed to the LEAs. And this money is used to provide special education services to students attending private schools. While these students may not get all the services that they would get if they were enrolled in a public school setting, they do still have a right to benefit from special education funding under IDEA.
All right, good to know. So how does ADAC advocacy assist the private schools with their students when accessing these services?
Yeah, so the ADAC Advocacy Foundation is a separate 501c3 from the ADAC, which is a separate company that provides professional development and other educational services to both public and private schools. So the ADAC Advocacy Foundation really focuses on empowering non-public schools leaders to access their fair share of education program funding, including federal education funding under ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, as well as the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And we do this primarily through 2 services that we offer. The first is federal programs coaching support, where we really just work with private school leaders. One of the clients that we've had great success working with has been Teach Florida. And so pleased that Danny Aqua is here today to share that experience. And really just providing coaching support to these private school leaders before, during, and after their consultation meetings with their public school counterparts, as well as support for families who are going through the eligibility process, the child find process through the school district.
All right, love to hear that. So Danny, tell us more about your involvement here. So you're a Jewish Day School Network leader here. So what was your experience with IDEA?
I think, unfortunately, I have to go with very frustrating. And I think the way I think about it is we're all in this to help kids, right? That's our goal. It pains us to see students in school with disabilities or even unidentified disabilities that are just struggling. And everybody listening to this podcast knows a child that struggled through school. And a lot of times there's just an undiagnosed disability there that we could help that child succeed. And I say frustrating because this federal law wasn't really thought out in a way that could help private schools so directly, because it goes through the school districts, and then their job is to also administer their private school students. And so we come up as an afterthought, and not the tier one group that they're trying to support. And so we had a lot of limitations and frustrations in trying to get our students evaluated. So the first part is actually getting our students evaluated, because you can't address a disability and provide services if you don't know what the issue is. And that process has been, at least here in Florida for the Jewish Day School Network, very challenging. It can take months, years, if it even gets done at all. Part of that is shortage of resources. Part of that is just the varying excuses. But to get children through the process, and we have some shocking statistics, like less than 1% of students in our schools being identified, and we know many more children than that actually have disabilities that can be serviced. But once we even work with ADAC and have one-to-one advocates for our families in our system that we a lot of times hire ourselves to help the students get through, then getting the services is also challenging. Quality services that can help these kids thrive. And so that's why I'm on this podcast today, to try to just share some light, spread some light on this challenge, and hope to help more children in the future.
All right. We're glad to be able to help with that, especially with all these kids in the mix here. And Nancy, as an ADAC advocacy board member, what do you view is like the most important role of ADAC advocacy here?
So just want to second what I heard Danny say, which is we care about kids thriving. Wherever they're in school, we need to make sure that they're getting what they need to get their best foot forward. And right now, that's not always happening. The ADAC Advocacy Board and organization is committed to raising awareness about some of these issues. Again, the point that Danny made about the fact that sometimes these kids feel like they're an afterthought, and no one should be an afterthought. It shouldn't matter where they're in school. If we have a law that exists that has a goal of ensuring that kids get what they need, then all kids should be getting what they need. And that's really the intent of the ADAC advocacy work, is to spread awareness. And many people, and I would imagine people listening to this podcast, are somewhat familiar with IDEA, but many people really do not know that there was always an intention that private school students, whether they're in a Jewish day school or a Catholic school or another private school setting, that those students have some rights, that even if they're not in a public school setting, there is some funding that was intended to address their needs, and when it comes to special education and disability. And so that's really the goal of this organization, is to raise awareness and to be committed to ensuring that kids get what they need.
All right, perfect. And IDEA, did that first start in like 2004, right? I believe it was around there.
IDEA was last reauthorized in 2004, but it was passed in the 70s. So it's been around for quite a while. And even after the last reauthorization in 2004, which is 20 years ago at this point, we're finding that it's still misunderstood on both sides by a lot of private school leaders, by a lot of district leaders, and seriously underutilized as a program to help support kids. So I've seen a lot of great models where districts are doing a fantastic job and are really providing really high quality services to kids with disabilities in private schools, but it's really unequal across the country. And there's a lot more work that needs to be done to raise awareness and to get this program that we know can and should work to be providing these services to kids who really deserve and need these services.
Gotcha.
And I'll just step in and say both the public school administrators as well as parents and families need to be educated about what's available and possible. And so that's what this work is all about. And to Ariella's point, some states or districts are more knowledgeable than others, but it really varies across the country. And our goal is to make sure that we're all on equal footing and that we all understand what's possible. But then I think Ariella might agree that there's opportunity for improvement as well, that the law as it stands has some challenges. And so our hope is that in the future, it will perhaps be reauthorized and even look a little bit better and different and get at what the whole goal is, which is addressing kids' needs.
Okay. And Danny, do you anticipate the IDEA law being reauthorized after this upcoming presidential election or something like that?
Yeah, it's always interesting when you have a presidential election because people start talking about things and you wonder what's going to happen after. But I think just before focusing on the future and the presidential and what may happen after, I want to quickly highlight the past, which is we mentioned ID passing in the 70s. And that was really what created this idea that every single child, even if they had disabilities, has a right to a free and appropriate public education. Before that, we didn't have that expectation. And IDEA does not create that for private school students. And that's a key difference. Some states do expand that to private school students, but every single public school child is entitled to that. But then the private school students are still entitled to those evaluations, and for the district to find them out, seek them out, evaluate them, find the disability, and then provide services in their private schools. And this does come with a lot of funding. And that's really the key here is money. And so for the last 25 years, IDA's worked under this 2004 law where they've only increased the funding a little here and there. And the Democrats on the campaign trail, often their talking point is let's fully fund IDA and make sure we double, triple the funding. And the Republicans now are talking a lot about eliminating entirely this federal involvement in education or getting rid of the Department of Education. What most people don't realize is a lot of times when Republicans talk about that, they don't talk about getting rid of all the programs. So they're not actually saying, let's get rid of IDEA. A lot of times they're saying, let's move IDEA to a different department or combine departments and make the federal government a little smaller. It's, I think, unimaginable to think that anyone will eliminate such a large program helping a lot of kids with disabilities. But if the Democrats get their way and continue to increase funding, I think they really might have to reauthorize IDEA because the current funding levels are set in a 25-year-old formula. And what that's meant is there really was no difference in how much each state got per student 20-something years ago. Now, some states will get close to double what other states get per child. And as you continue to fund it more, that's going to triple, quadruple. And all of a sudden, you'll have a state like Vermont or Wyoming getting triple the amount of a state like Florida or something like that. And that just wouldn't make sense. So I think if the Democrats do continue to fund it, they would probably have to look at reauthorizing it and figuring out how they're going to better administer it. And if the Republicans win, I think there's some precedent. When President Donald Trump was in office in 2019, they had a survey asking a lot of involved people, what do you think about IDA? How is it working? With the stated goal of reauthorizing it or looking at reauthorizing it. So there's a lot of talk about it. And I think there is a chance that it could happen after the next presidential election, regardless of who wins.
So if it does end up being reauthorized, Danny, what changes would you like to see affected by this?
I'd love to jump in this question. I'm sure Ariella and Nancy would love to jump in on this too. I think the key change for us is having the program work more simply and efficiently. The way I think about it is not having all the money go directly through the school districts for private school students, creating some alternative ways where someone a little closer to the child, whether it be the school directly or some other entity that can reach the private school student more quickly and efficiently, can be created. And that would be the one thing I would point to that I think would make a big difference in the program.
All right.
We have for that too, right? If we look at, there was a lot of conversation relating to the COVID funding, the Emergency Assistance to Non-Public Schools program that flowed through the state, and there was a fiscal agent involved because none of the states really wanted to, deal with all the different private schools. So they hired a fiscal agent, and the fiscal agent really just took over and administered the program. And I can't say in every single case, but in a lot of states, in a lot of cases, this went much, much, much more smoothly, and it was much simpler. And it also removes challenging incentives for LEAs, where if you find a kid eligible, you're going to have to pay for that kid's services. And that can be expensive. A lot of our districts are facing tremendous budgetary shortfalls, especially with rising rates of inflation, among other challenges. And I think that having this just administered straight, off the top at a state level, we take out the private school share, we give it to a third party who's the fiscal agent who manages the program, identifies the kids, and gets some services to those kids through third parties is often the way to go, because we also see that we lose a lot of the funding in paying for district staff members with salaries determined by the unions, benefits determined by the unions. We got to look at what are the rates that are going to work in a private school setting for the private school to deliver services that are appropriate for private school students. So I do think there's some creative thinking, and there's some models out there from programs that have actually worked that could make this a little bit easier to administer on both the private school side and the public school side.
And I just want to back up for 1 second. And I love the picture you paint, Ariella, for the future and for simplifying. And yet the reality right now might be worth talking about for a moment for people who might not know exactly how it works. And obviously every district is a little different. Every local education district has its own way of doing things, and every state is a little different. But in general, funds are flowing directly into the districts, and then and those funds, if they are proportionate share funds, they should have been allocated for the group of private school students within a district. But what is often happening is either those district administrators don't understand how it's supposed to work and what proportionate share for private school students, how it's supposed to be administered, or they understand and they prefer not to really focus on it because, as Ariella pointed, they have their own budgetary pressures and are trying to address the needs of the students in the public school setting. What often has happened is an assumption or sort of a mischaracterization that private school students are taking the funds from the public school, when the reality is these are funds that are specifically apportioned for private school students in a particular district. And so there's a lot of confusion related to how those funds are now being allocated under the current IDEA. And so before we even get to reauthorization, which we know could happen but may not happen, we've got some work to do with our current setup to both get better clarity and better education, both to the private schools who are located in districts, to the public school districts and the administrators, so that they understand what does proportionate share mean, and how do private school students who are getting an education in a private school setting in their district, what are their rights under the federal law. So there's a lot of confusion, and really our work is to try to clear some of that up and to work with what we have, which is an imperfect law and a somewhat clunky way of distributing those funds.
Yeah,
And I just want to jump back in because Ariella, you sparked a memory of the COVID funds, and which is a perfect example of how the system could work better. So I mentioned ideally not going through the school districts would make things much easier. So during COVID, the first round of funding of ESSER went through the school districts. And we had a big school that wanted Chromebooks for their kids to learn remotely. And the school district said, no, we will not reimburse your Chromebooks because we have an exclusive contract with Lenovo. And now, great, let them negotiate and get a good deal from Lenovo for their exclusive contract, but that shouldn't apply to a private school who doesn't have that exclusive contract. And there's no reason that the federal money should not help those children be able to learn remotely. And another example, same story, a school had a purchase that the district wasn't sure or not if they could or could not approve. It took them months to finally figure out that they could approve that purchase. But by that time, the invoice the school had sent had expired under the district guidelines. And they had to go through a whole new process then to submit and potentially buy this. None of that happened under the second round of COVID funding, the EANS funding, because the state of Florida said, you know what, we're not going to have the private school money go through the districts. We're going to have it go through the state, and we're going to hire a third-party vendor. In this case, it was a company called ClassWallet to administer the funding to private school students. And I can tell you it was night and day. And if we could just extend that type of system to IDEA, then we would see many more kids receive the services and evaluations they need much more quickly.
all right. I love to hear that. And you guys, if we want to find out some more information about all this or find out some resources, what are some websites or things we could check out here to find out more information?
Phil, I would first recommend that people check out the ADAC Advocacy's website, which is the adacadvocacy.com. And then another really helpful guide is the Office of Non-Public School Education has their own webpage that has some really great resources for non-public school administrators and students. And maybe I can send you a link. It's a little bit of a complicated website to read off now, but people can even just Google Office of Non-Public Education, U.S. Department of Ed, and it comes right up, and it has a link to all the different programs that the Department of Education administers on behalf of private school students, where we have a right to participate equitably, including guidance and ESSA guidance and all sorts of different policy letters and presentations. I would say that's probably the most comprehensive site to find all the information that people are looking for regarding these programs.
Okay, and Nancy, do you have any other resources, or Danny?
Sure.
I don't. So go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, no, people can visit our website, teachcoalition.org/FL. We're currently in the heart of the state scholarship season. So most of our work is centered on the Florida State Scholarships for Families. But we'll have information. People can reach out to us as well for more information about Florida-specific IDA concerns.
And I was just going to add, not websites, but just don't be afraid to ask questions. I think families who might be listening to this, or others who are not sure how this all works, the most important thing is just to ask. My student needs help. How can he get it? How can she get it? And sometimes the local public school district might be more open to engaging with you if you show up as a person and engage with them directly. You never know where the doors may open. I think a lot of people are overwhelmed. I'm just speaking now as a parent, now a young adult, but a student who had challenges. And it took a lot of my own sort of investigation and asking questions to figure out where some of the disconnect was. So don't be afraid to ask the questions.
All right, and it's such an important topic. I'm so glad you guys joined us here today. I'm glad that you're helping to get these kids the education they deserve and they could progress through life the way they can. And thank you again, Ariella, Danny, and Nancy, so much for joining us here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you guys have a great day, okay? You take care.
1 in 5 children in the United States have learning differences, making it more challenging than ever to be a teacher or school leader. At ADAC, we empower K-12 educators to meet the learning needs of all students through customized professional development and coaching services. Learn more at www.theadac.com. That's THEADAC.
Thank you for listening to this episode of ADAC Answers. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. To learn more about ADAC, please visit our website, www.theadac.com. That's theadac.com. You can also find us on Facebook and LinkedIn.
.com.